Hey guys, welcome to my tutorial on VICON labeling and visual 3D data processing. I'm going to be showing you how to do everything after data collection. So assuming you collected your data right, you did the proper wand calibration, you masked the cameras, you did proper naming, and you also saved in the right spot, right, on your flash drives and the computer. I'm going to walk you through the process of doing everything after that. So everything from labeling your subject, creating your subject, gap filling, and then once we've labeled all our trials, right, we then move on and transfer our files to Visual 3D where we will process. So this will be a very casual recording. So I'm just going to be doing my thing here, and just outlining some tips and key points as we go through. So let's say you finish recording, right? This is what you see right here. So I'm going to open up my first trial here. So I open up, and this was one of the labs that we conducted in ENG 3150. So I opened up one of my trials here. The first thing you want to do when you double click is you want to hit this button right here, Reconstruct Pipeline. I'm not sure why it's not showing, but it's called Reconstruct.
Pipeline ended.
So over here we have our motion trial, right? And if you've collected EMGs, which we have in this particular trial, you can see the data of the devices you've connected and collected through right on the left tab here under devices. So if I were to split the screen into two, change this window display from 3D perspective to graph, I can highlight the device I would like to view the data of live stream. And I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So 4, 5, and 6. So you're able to also watch this data stream live stream. So you can see your data in sync with your motion trials if you do this type of setup. So graph, 3D perspective. So I'm going to close this for a second. Now, the first thing that you want to do, I'm going to go ahead and start labeling and creating my subject. So right now, with nothing labeled, these little dots, right, they mean nothing to VICON. They mean nothing to VICON but little blobs in the space. We need to tell VICON that each of these different markers are part of a greater picture. So each of these markers define the thigh segment, right? Each of these markers define these markers together define the shank, and these markers together define the foot. So let's go ahead and do that, right? I'm gonna go ahead and close data management. So to create the subject, we're gonna go to subjects right here in the resources panel, and we're gonna go to create a blank subject. You can name this whatever you like. I can just call the subject test, whatever, right? So once I do that, you're gonna have a new subject here, and if I were to open this drop-down menu, there's groups for markers, segments, joints. That's what we have. After I've done this step right here, I'm gonna go to Tools, I'm gonna go to Subject Preparation, and this is where I want to start creating my segments. So this is where I'll be creating my segments and highlighting all the markers that are within that particular segment. So we want to start with the right thigh, right? So we're going to go top down. So I'm going to define the thigh, the shank, and the foot. So let's go with right thigh. It makes it very easy to name the segments and which side they're on, especially down the road. And if you have a full body marker set, it's really important to define like what side the segment is, and obviously what segment you're labeling. So let's go ahead and do that. So create segments, name, create. So the convention is as follows. You always start with the first marker, so the closest marker. I think it's the proximal. So the proximal marker first. So hit up the joints. So you start with the first joint. You go to the very end joint of that segment. Once you got the joints, you then go ahead and hit the clusters. So joint 1, joint 2, hit the clusters. I like doing crisscross. I don't know why, that's what I learned. but you guys get the picture, right? So start with the joints, hit the clusters, create. So there it is. There's our right thigh segment created. I also want to let you know that it's very, very, very important that you're doing all this within one particular frame, okay? So watch this. If I were to scroll my mouse one frame ahead, I lose that. That's grayed out. I don't want that. I'm gonna go back to 47. That's because 47 is where I started. Okay, so we're gonna go back. There we go. So it's very important. It's key. I'm gonna remind you again. It's key to make sure you're labeling your subjects in one frame across all segments. In this case, 47. I like 47 because I can see all my markers in this frame. And I also realized I made a mistake. I should have created my subject in the noise trial, but that's not a big deal, because as long as we have all the markers in any frame for any of our trials, we can use that frame to create our subject. So let's keep going forward. The next segment that I want to create is the right shank. Create. I'm going to use the same two ending markers from the thigh because that's the starting markers for the shank. So remember, hit the joints first, then hit the clusters. I'm going to do a crisscross and then hit the clusters. Perfect. Create. I'm then gonna go ahead and create the foot. All right, there's our foot right there. Oh look, I made a mistake. I should have selected these two markers instead of that because that marker was the heel. No biggie. I'm gonna hit escape. I'm gonna you know what, I'm gonna go back. Not a big deal. Okay, right shank. Oh yeah, and to undo, simply just hit Control Z. That's how I did that. So right shank. Should have selected this guy right here. Lateral and medial malleolus of the ankle. Right, once I have my joints, I'm gonna go ahead and hit the clusters. Cool. Right, moving on to the foot. Okay, for the foot, I'm going to use the ending markers of the shank, right? Crisscross with the ending markers of the foot. So the first and fifth metatarsal. After I've done that, I then want to hit the clusters. We haven't done this in our lab 2, but I recently added this in lab 4 because I want to have you guys. So if you're doing the feet, do definitely add 3 markers anywhere else as clusters and tracking markers, just in case these guys go missing. So in this case, I put 1 marker on top of the foot, 1 marker on the side, and 1 on the heel. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the clusters, hit create. Awesome, we're done. There is our segment model. That makes it very easy to change the coloring. So I'm going to go ahead and change, right click, or actually no, come down here, maybe have that as pink. Get the foot, change it to cyan. Cool. This makes it easy. I'm also gonna pull up the C motion marker set. 1 second. Where is it? So C motion right here. Just gonna go to C motion marker set. This is the naming convention that we're going to be using for our segment. So I'm going to go down to where the segment was. So thigh model 1. This guy right here is going to be RFT. Simply change the name right there. It can be very crucial for you to change the names of each of these markers. Otherwise, you'll be super confused with this default naming system, right? The reason why we have these acronyms is because not only do they help us define and learn where we're placing the markers at, but it also makes it easy when you're translating these markers into their names and especially when we move it to visual 3D, which we'll see later. So I'm gonna go ahead. This will be RFLE. That will be RFME. Cool. For the clusters, I mean, I just go with something that I'm familiar with. I'll just call this RTH1. These aren't as important. It's really important to define the joint angles, the joint markers. Those would be more important. But for these guys, I'll just put a simple naming convention for me to easily relate to. Okay, RTH4 done. Go down to the shank. RSH1, RSH, H3, RSH4. Cool. Down to the shank. The foot, I mean. Let's go down to where the foot is, or the shank. Okay. RFAL, RTAM. And look, that's what they stand for. Cool. Okay, so RTAM, right over there. What on earth? How do I get that? Okay, there it is. RFAL. Cool. Moving on to the foot. So we can, again, doesn't have to be like scientifically accurate or like doesn't have to be like set in stone. I can just call this whatever marker that I can refer to. In this case, I'll call this big toe. Actually, yeah, big toe. I'll call this pinky toe. And again, we're not placing these markers on the toes. They're the bony part of the toes, but just for simplicity's sake. I'll call this top foot, something that I can relate to, side foot, and this will be the heel. All right, perfect. So after we've defined our segments, changed some colors, also changed the naming, the last thing that's the most important, you can see here that if I save that, this is still red. If I hover over it, it says the subject has unlinked segments. So you obviously can tell that the last step of the labeling is linking the segments together. So now VICON knows what these markers are, but this could mean anything to VICON. This could be a brick. This could be a block, right? This VICON is still not sure what this is. Like, it's still a stick to VICON. We have to tell VICON that nope, these segments are actually linked together and they're not just floating in space. So to start linking segments, right in tools, subject prep, we're still here. I'm gonna go to, so starting with the thigh and the shank. So I'm gonna enable advanced joints. Pick the joint that you think best represents the link between the two segments. We've only been using the hinge joint and the ball joint. I've never really used these guys. So let's just stick with these guys. So hinge joint obviously is best represents the link between the thigh and the shank, because you can just see here that it's just like a sliding up and down motion. And whoops, you can tell I made a mistake. I moved my frame numbers. So I'm gonna go back to frame 47 where these guys are highlighted, right? Always make sure you're at the same frame, or at least remember it. So 47 is right over there. Cool. So I'm gonna link these segments. So link the hinge joint between. So I select link, and then it asks me to select the parent segment. I'm gonna go to my segments. I'm gonna link the thigh with the shank, and as soon as I do that and hit escape, you guys can see that a hinge joint actually gets created. I'm gonna close this because we don't need it anymore. A hinge joint actually gets created, right? It's pretty cool. And now moving on to the last joint, right? There's two joints here, that one over there and that one. And obviously you can tell the shank and the foot represent a ball joint. So if you're doing the arms, right? I would say, you know, like the upper arm and the forearm would be a hinge, right? And the forearm and the wrist would be a ball joint. So ball joint, I'm gonna go ahead and select my shank and my foot. And now you can see this asterisk just basically says that I need to save it, and we're done. Wait, did it save? Why is it not saving? Okay. Alright, it's saved, but for some reason it doesn't want to save there. That's weird. But we're done. We're done. Let me just hover over to another trial. Okay, that was weird. It's saved now. So that's good. So now that this text isn't read anymore, we're confident to say that our subject is complete with defined segments and defined joints. So creating our subject, complete. The next thing we'll have to do is, obviously here I've created a subject within a motion trial, but you can see that this one is actually perfect. So this motion trial is actually perfect. No gaps. And gaps are basically when one of these markers disappear, or if you see flickering. So to move on to gap filling, we're done with subject preparation. We move to label and edit. All right, so this is the section right here. This is where we're gonna be gap filling any markers that disappear throughout the trial. What gap filling is basically, say if this marker goes missing for a millisecond or for a couple of seconds throughout the trial, gap filling is basically saying, okay, so for all the times this marker goes missing, use a donor marker, preferably one that's nearby. Use a donor marker, whether it's this guy, or this guy, to fill in for this guy when he disappears, based on what these guys know of this before and after the frames. So I'll show you what that looks like. This trial obviously looks terrifyingly perfect. If I were to move to another trial, so I open a new trial, and now I don't even have to hit reconstruct anymore. Since I already have a subject in place, I'm gonna go ahead and hit reconstruct and label, and watch this.
Pipeline ended.
Done. No questions asked, right? It's perfect. But what do you guys notice? We have a gap, right? In this gap filling menu right here, it tells us that we have a gap. So RTH3 goes missing for one gap. So let's find out where it goes missing. So if I were to select that, it shows us that at frame 436, one of our boys up here disappear for like one frame. So I'm gonna scroll back with my mouse. There it is. It goes missing, and then it appears. So let's gap fill. To do that, I'm gonna choose that marker again. Okay. And I'm gonna go to, so these are the different algorithms and techniques that VICON uses. I mean, each of them are special in their own little way. I've always been comfortable using the pattern fill technique. You guys can definitely explore the other ones, but to make your life easy, let's just stick with this algorithm, this technique. So we're gonna go ahead and select a donor for our missing marker. That way we can fill it up. So I'm gonna go to pick source. It says select a donor trajectory for the copy pattern algorithm. Pick source. And again, if this marker is going missing here, you don't want to be using a donor down way here. No, like you want to use a donor that's closest to it, because they have a better idea of where this guy is based on what they know of it in the past and in the future, right? So our donor, I'm gonna go ahead with this one. So it maps out you can see the blue line right here. It maps out, actually, there it is, that tiny green dashed line. It maps out where that marker will be if you were to choose that. I'm happy with it. You go ahead and select fill or all. I would go ahead and select all. That way, if you had like 100 gaps, you don't have to. So choosing fill does one gap at a time, and that'll be very annoying if you have like 100 gaps. If you were to select all, you're basically saying, okay, you know what? For all the times throughout the entire trial, this guy goes missing. Let this guy be its buddy, right? That way, whenever he goes missing, this guy will fill that gap, no matter how many gaps there are. So I'll go with all. In cases where you choose a donor and this is grayed out, that means at some point your donor also goes missing. So in that case, choose a different donor until you find that this is not grayed out anymore. So I'll go ahead and choose all, and that's it. This is a clean trial, no gaps, very clean, and we're good to go. So I'm not gonna go ahead and do the rest for all these trials. I'm just gonna use one trial, import it to Visual 3D, and show you guys how to process and get some useful data.